Warning: this content may be unsuitable for viewers under 18 and those sensitive to fear, horror, or graphic situations. If you are under 18 or sensitive to frightening content, please do not watch. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. You've planned everything. The hotel is booked. The flights are confirmed. The bags are packed. You've been counting down the days for months. Vacation is supposed to be the reward, the break from the grind, the memories that last a lifetime. But what happens when the getaway becomes the nightmare? What happens when the room smells wrong? When the stranger won't stop staring? When the road behind you turns dark with headlights that won't quit? These aren't campfire stories. These aren't made up. These are real accounts from real Americans who boarded flights, loaded up their cars, and set sail on cruise ships, only to come face to face with something no travel agent ever warned them about. The stories you're about to read will make you think twice before you check into your next hotel room, before you walk alone on that beach, before you answer that knock at the door. Once you start reading, you won't be able to stop. But don't say we didn't warn you. The smell beneath the mattress. Marcus and his new wife, Danny, had dreamed about Miami for years. From the moment Marcus proposed on a rooftop in Chicago, they agreed. Miami Beach would be their honeymoon. Sunshine, ocean air, the best seafood on the East Coast. They'd saved for 8 months to make it happen right. A suite at one of the big luxury hotels right on the Strip. Ocean-facing, top floor. They checked in just after 3 in the afternoon. The lobby was gleaming marble and polished brass, the kind of place that makes you feel like you've arrived somewhere important. The bellhop brought their bags up on a cart. The elevator smelled like vanilla. Everything was perfect until they opened the door to their room. It hit them both at the same time, a thick, heavy odor that had no place in a luxury suite. Marcus described it later as the smell of something rotten, hidden beneath something sweet, like someone had sprayed air freshener directly over a pile of garbage and hoped for the best. Danny pressed her hand over her nose and turned to look at Marcus with wide eyes. "Tell me you smell that," she said. "I smell it," he said. Marcus was on the phone with the front desk inside of 2 minutes. He was calm but firm. This was his honeymoon, and the suite they'd booked smelled like a crime scene. The front desk manager, a polite but clearly stressed woman named Karen, apologized profusely. She explained that there was a massive hospitality convention in town that weekend. Every single room in the building was booked. Every hotel on the beach was at full capacity. They simply had nowhere else to put them. What she could offer, she said, was a complimentary dinner at any restaurant in Miami Beach of their choosing, a full cleaning crew dispatched to the suite immediately, and a personal guarantee that the problem would be resolved before they returned from dinner. Marcus looked at Danny. She shrugged. They hadn't eaten since breakfast. Might as well make the best of it. They had an extraordinary dinner. Stone crab, lobster bisque, a bottle of wine that cost more than Marcus's monthly car payment. For a couple of hours, sitting at a candlelit table with the ocean visible through the restaurant window, they almost forgot about the smell. Almost. When they returned to the suite just after 9, Marcus slid the keycard in the door, pushed it open, and breathed in. The smell was still there. Fainter, maybe. Buried beneath the heavy scent of industrial cleaning products, but still there. Like something underneath the clean was refusing to be cleaned away. Danny sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at her husband. "It's still here, Marcus." "I know," he said. He called the front desk again. This time, Karen's voice had a new edge to it, the tension of someone who had been dreading this exact call. She told him they would send another crew. She told him they would use every product available to them. She told him to give them a few hours while he and his wife walked the strip or hit the casino floor. They spent 2.5 hours wandering through a casino, winning nothing, saying little. Both of them were thinking the same thing, and neither was saying it. When they finally returned to the room just before midnight, the full housekeeping team had come through. New sheets, new towels, new curtains. The carpet steamed, every surface wiped down with the strongest products the hotel stocked. The smell was still there. Marcus stood in the center of the room for a long moment. Something had shifted in him, not just frustration, but something sharper. A sense that this wasn't a cleaning problem, that whatever was causing this smell wasn't on the surfaces. It was coming from somewhere else, somewhere the cleaning crew hadn't thought to look, or hadn't dared to look. "I'm going to find it," he said quietly. Danny stood by the door with her arms crossed, watching as her husband began pulling the room apart. He checked the closets. He checked inside the air conditioning vent. He checked under the bathroom sink. He got down on his hands and knees and looked under the couch and under the minibar. Nothing. He checked behind the curtains. He pulled the dresser away from the wall. Still nothing. Then he went to the bed. He pulled back the fresh sheets. He checked the pillows. He ran his hand along the headboard. Then he grabbed the top mattress, the one the housekeeping crew had remade with crisp white linens, and shoved it up and off the frame. Danny saw his body go completely still. "Marcus, don't come over here," he said. His voice was completely flat, the voice of someone whose brain had not yet fully processed what his eyes were seeing. Between the mattress and the box spring, wedged into the gap where no one would ever think to look during a standard cleaning, was a woman's body. She had been there, the police later determined, for several days. The luxury suite, the honeymoon. The smell that wouldn't go away no matter how many times they cleaned. Marcus and Danny didn't stay in Miami that night. They didn't stay in Miami at all. They gave their statements to the police in the lobby, watched the officers disappear upstairs with gloves and flashlights and evidence bags, and then they sat together in a taxi back to the airport and waited for the first flight home in silence. They still haven't taken another vacation together. Some smells, Marcus says, you don't forget. Some things you find, you can unfind. The case remains under investigation. The man in the maid's uniform. Tyler and his wife, Cassidy, had been married for 3 years before they finally took the honeymoon they'd always talked about. A week on Oahu, the island of Hawaii, right on the beach. They weren't big travelers. Tyler worked construction back in Colorado. Cassidy was a middle school teacher. They'd put aside a little bit each month since the wedding, and by the time their 3rd anniversary rolled around, they finally had enough to do it right. They arrived on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, they'd already found their rhythm. Wake up early, walk down to the beach, spend the afternoon exploring, eat somewhere good at night. It was everything they'd wanted. The ocean was the exact shade of blue that Cassidy had pinned to her vision board back when they were first engaged. On the 3rd day, they were sitting on the beach when Cassidy stood up to use the restroom. The public bathrooms were about 100 yards up the path through the palm trees. Tyler watched her go, then tilted his head back and closed his eyes, listening to the waves. She came back about 10 minutes later. She sat down beside him and said nothing for a moment, staring straight ahead at the water. Tyler looked over at her. Her jaw was tight. "What's wrong?" he asked. She told him. When she'd walked into the bathroom, there had been a man standing just outside the entrance, heavy-set, mid-40s, dark baseball cap pulled low, watching her walk in. When she came out, he was still there. He stepped directly into her path, She'd nearly walked into him. She'd stepped to one side. He'd stepped to block her. She'd stepped the other way. He'd stepped again. He didn't say a word, just stood there, watching her with no expression at all. She'd only gotten past him because two other women had come around the corner heading for the bathroom, and he'd stepped aside to let them pass. Cassidy had used that window and kept moving, not looking back, not stopping until she was back in sight of Tyler on the beach. Tyler sat up and looked toward the bathrooms. He asked her what the man looked like. She described him, the cap, the build, the blank expression. They both scanned the beach. He was gone. Their hotel was only a few minutes' walk from the beach, so they headed back quickly, stopping on the way to report what had happened to a uniformed police officer they spotted near the main path. The officer took a brief description and told them to be careful. Standard response. Standard advice. They cleaned up and went out to dinner, a nice seafood place near the marina, the kind of restaurant with fresh fish printed on a chalkboard menu. They walked around afterward, bought shave ice from a cart on the corner, watched the sunset from a lookout over the water. By the time they got back to the hotel, it was close to midnight, and the day's unease had mostly faded into the background. Tyler was brushing his teeth when they heard the knock at the door. He spit, rinsed, and walked out to the main room. Cassidy was already still, watching the door. Tyler looked through the peephole. Standing in the hallway was a man in a white housekeeping uniform, cart off to the side, looking directly at the peephole as if he knew exactly where it was and who was looking through it. Tyler opened the door partway, keeping his foot against the base. "Can I help you?" The man immediately pushed forward, putting his hand on the doorframe, trying to step inside. Tyler braced himself and pushed back. "Hey, what do you want?" The man said he'd left something in the room while cleaning earlier. He needed to come in and get it. Tyler thought about that for exactly 1 second. The Do Not Disturb sign had been hanging on their door all day. No one had entered the room. He was certain of it. Then the man looked past Tyler's shoulder, and Tyler followed his gaze. He was looking at Cassidy. He heard her sharp intake of breath before he heard her scream. "That's him. Tyler, that's him. That's the man from the beach." Everything happened very fast after that. The man shoved the door hard, catching Tyler off balance, getting one hand around his throat. With his other hand, he was already reaching behind himself, and Tyler saw the glint of a blade before he could process what it meant. The knife swung in a short, fast arc, and Tyler lurched backward trying to get clear of it, twisting, feeling the air move close to his face. Then he heard the lamp shatter. Cassidy had picked up the bedside lamp, cord yanked from the wall, and she had swung it with both hands directly into the side of the man's head. The impact knocked him sideways, his grip on Tyler's throat breaking, the knife clattering across the tile floor near the bathroom door. The noise had brought people into the hallway. Doors up and down the corridor had opened. Someone was screaming. Someone was calling 911. Hotel security arrived within 4 minutes. 2 men in blue shirts who pinned the intruder to the floor, while Tyler and Cassidy stood against the far wall, Cassidy still holding the broken base of the lamp. The police arrived shortly after. The man in the uniform was removed in handcuffs. Officers took statements from Tyler, from Cassidy, and from 3 other guests in neighboring rooms who'd heard the commotion and come to their doors. He wasn't a hotel employee. The uniform was not issued by the hotel. No one at the front desk recognized him. The investigation would later uncover that his name matched a person who had been reported to police at 2 other beach locations in the past month for following and approaching women. Tyler and Cassidy flew home 2 days early. They sat in the airport together with their bags between their feet, barely speaking, When Tyler's mom asked how the trip was, he said fine. He didn't tell her the rest of it for almost 2 months. If she hadn't grabbed that lamp, he said once and then stopped talking. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Cassidy already knew. The roadblock in Georgia. It was just past 11 at night on a stretch of interstate through rural Georgia when Kevin first saw the flashing red lights on the road ahead. He'd been driving for nearly 11 hours straight. In the back seat, his wife Michelle and their 2 kids, Jalen, age 9, and Ava, age 6, were sound asleep, heads tilted against the windows, half covered in travel blankets. They were on their way to Florida for a Disney World trip, the kind of family vacation Kevin had been promising the kids for 2 years. He'd calculated that pushing through the night from their home in Northern Virginia would save them a hotel night, which was $150 they could put toward park tickets instead. The highway through southern Georgia at 11 p.m. was nearly empty. Kevin had seen maybe 6 cars in the past hour. He had his cruise control set, a podcast playing low through one earbud. He was tired but alert. He told himself, 2 more hours to the Florida line. 2 more hours. Then he saw the lights. They weren't police lights. No blue, no white strobe. These were red, the deep, steady flash of emergency triangles or road flares, blinking in a slow pulse on the road ahead. Kevin took his foot off the cruise control and let the car slow as he approached. His headlights lit up the scene in pieces. A car parked sideways across most of the lane. 2 orange traffic cones, one on each side, and 2 SOS lights blinking on the pavement in front of the car. He slowed to almost a stop, maybe 30 yards back. 2 figures stepped out from behind the car, both wearing dark hoodies, hoods up. They walked toward Kevin's vehicle with a certain kind of deliberate, unhurried pace that made something cold move through his chest. Kevin shifted into reverse. One of the men reached his driver's side window. Kevin cracked it an inch, barely enough to hear, not enough to reach through. "You need something?" Kevin asked. The man looked directly at him and said, without hesitation, "Open the door." Kevin shut the window. The man's hand went to his pocket. Kevin put the car in drive and floored it. He clipped one of the orange cones and felt the bump of the SOS light under his front tire as he accelerated past their car and onto the open highway. His hands were steady. His brain was running very fast through a list of things he needed to do in the next 60 seconds. He checked his mirrors. For about 45 seconds, there was nothing. Then the headlights appeared, far back at first, then closing fast. Kevin was already doing 80. The headlights kept coming. He pushed the car to 90. The headlights kept closing. In the back seat, Michelle stirred and pushed herself upright, looking around in confusion at the dark, rushing highway. "Kevin, why are we going so fast?" "Don't wake up the kids," he said, voice low and even. "We're being followed. I need you to call 911 right now, quietly, and tell them we're on I-75 southbound in Georgia, and someone is following us." Michelle stared at the back windshield for 1 second. Then she had her phone out. The first shot blew the rear passenger side tire. Kevin felt the back end of the car kick out, and he corrected hard. Both hands locked on the wheel, jaw clenched. He got it straight. He kept moving. Then the second shot came and the other rear tire went. The car began to drag and pull and shudder, sparks visible in his mirror from the rim grinding the asphalt. "Kids, stay down," he said. "Keep your heads down." Jalen and Ava were both awake now, eyes wide, Ava beginning to cry. Michelle was on the phone with a 911 dispatcher, voice tight and controlled, giving their location. Kevin kept driving on the rims, engine screaming, the pursuing car ramming them from behind once, twice. the third impact hard enough to snap all their heads forward. Kevin was operating on pure will. He was sure this was how it ended. He was doing the math in his head, and the math wasn't working out. Then he heard the siren. Blue and red lights appeared in the far distance behind the vehicle that was following them. The pursuing car held for one more second, and then, at the last possible moment, veered sharply onto the exit ramp that Kevin happened to be right alongside. The police cruiser followed them onto the exit without slowing. Kevin pulled onto the shoulder and stopped. He put the car in park. He sat there for a moment with his hands on the steering wheel, listening to Ava cry in the back seat. Michelle was still on the phone. "We stopped," she said. "We're okay. I think we're okay." 10 minutes later, 2 additional squad cars pulled up behind them along with a tow truck. The officers were friendly and calm in the way that people are calm when they have good news. They'd caught the 2 men at the bottom of the exit ramp. Someone else had encountered the same roadblock setup earlier in the evening, managed to turn around in time, and had called it in before Kevin ever reached them. The officers found a handgun in the following vehicle consistent with the shots that had blown Kevin's tires. Kevin called his mother from the side of the highway at 1 a.m., while a technician measured the damage to his rims. His mother asked if everyone was all right. He said yes. She asked if they were still going to Disney. He looked back at his kids, huddled together in the back seat under their travel blankets. Ava asleep again, Jalen watching him with serious eyes. "Yeah," Kevin said. "We're still going." They made it to Disney World the next afternoon. Kevin doesn't drive at night anymore on long trips, not through Georgia, not anywhere. Under the car in St. Martin, my sister Rachel is one of the most level-headed people I've ever known. She's an accountant. She color codes her calendar 3 months in advance. She does not panic. She does not overreact. She sees the world very clearly and deals with it accordingly. So when Rachel tells me she hasn't been the same since what happened in St. Martin, I believe her. Not because she says so, but because I can see it. I've seen it for years now. A certain watchfulness, a way she has of checking exits in a room. We don't bring it up around her husband, Daniel. We've learned not to. They were on their honeymoon. They'd rented a small compact car to get around the island. Rachel had read that the best way to see St. Martin was to get off the tourist track and drive the scenic routes. On the 4th day, they took one of those routes, a 2-lane road that wound through the hillside vegetation, away from the main coast, cutting through fields of low sugarcane and flowering brush. Beautiful drive. Barely any traffic. The kind of road that makes you feel like you've found something the tour buses missed. They'd been on the road for about 40 minutes when Daniel slowed down and stopped. Ahead of them, partly pulled off the road, was a car, an old beat-up sedan, faded teal paint, no visible license plate. The rear end half buried in the brush on the shoulder, as if it had drifted off the road and stoled in the vegetation. Daniel put their rental in park. He looked over at Rachel and said, "Stay here." He got out and walked over to the other car slowly, the way you do when you're not quite sure what you're approaching. Rachel watched from behind the windshield. She saw him peer through the driver's window. She saw him check the back seat. She saw him walk around to the passenger side and look through that window too. Then he got down on one knee on the road surface and looked underneath the car. She saw him jump backward. Not step back. Jump. The sudden recoil of someone who has seen something that the brain takes a moment to process before the body reacts. Rachel got out. She called his name. Daniel looked back at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not fear exactly, but something past it. Something that had moved through fear into a different place. "Get back in the car," he said. She didn't get back in the car. She walked over to him and got down and looked under the car herself. Two men were lying flat on their stomachs in the dirt beneath the vehicle. They were large men, both of them, and they were pressed into the narrow space between the undercarriage and the ground with the practiced ease of people who had done this before. Each man held a large knife. Between them, visible from where Rachel knelt on the road, was a body. She said the thing she remembers most is that neither man moved when she looked at them. They just looked back at her, waiting, still. The way something waits that has all the patience in the world because it knows it doesn't need to hurry. Daniel had his hand on her arm before she fully stood up. He walked her backward, quickly, firmly, not running but close to it, to their rental car, put her in the passenger seat, got in, and drove. He didn't slow down until they hit the first intersection with a working gas station and two other vehicles in the lot. They called the police from that gas station parking lot. They waited together in the car with the doors locked while Daniel's hands sat in his lap and would not stop shaking. Rachel stared straight out the windshield at the road they had come down and said nothing for a very long time. The police took their statement. They went back to their resort and spent the last 3 days of their honeymoon barely leaving the room. They don't talk about it, as I said. Daniel changes the subject when it comes near. Rachel doesn't change the subject. She just gets very quiet, and her eyes go somewhere else for a moment. And then she comes back and finds something else to say. I've thought about that road a lot over the years. I've thought about how a different choice of route that morning, left instead of right, main road instead of scenic, would have changed everything. How thin the margin is between a story you tell and a story that ends before you can tell it. Rachel is fine. She's good. She's healthy and happy, and her calendar is still color-coded. But she will not rent a car in a foreign country anymore, and she will not drive down roads that don't lead anywhere important. The man who followed me on the cruise. I was 17 that summer. My grandparents had booked a 10-day Royal Caribbean cruise for the entire extended family, Grandma and Grandpa, my parents, my aunt and uncle, my two cousins, my older brother Darius, who was 21, my sister Kezia and her boyfriend, and me. It was the most extravagant thing we had ever done as a family. My grandparents had been planning it for 2 years. My grandma had a folder. The ship was enormous. It had 4 restaurants, 2 pools, a movie screen on the deck, a bowling alley, and a nightclub that technically had a 21 and older policy that, in practice, was enforced with the same energy as a strongly worded suggestion. Our itinerary took us along the Florida coast and down to the Bahamas and back. Everything was gleaming. Everything smelled like sunscreen and the ocean. My grandmother cried during the sunset on the second evening because she said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Darius and I shared a cabin. Technically, this was a violation of the ship's policy about minors, but we just told anyone who asked that our dad was staying with us in that room too. And no one pushed it very hard. On the 4th night, Darius convinced me to come with him to the nightclub on the ship. It was loud and dark, and absolutely not age-appropriate for 17-year-olds. And I was having a reasonably good time until I started to notice the man at the far end of the room. He was sitting against the wall at a small table, alone, no drink in front of him. He wasn't dancing. He wasn't watching the room the way you do when you're bored at a party. He was watching me specifically. I moved to the left. His head turned left. I moved toward the bar. His eyes followed. I crossed to the other side of the room entirely, and he didn't move his body, just turned his head, tracking me across the space. I left the club without telling Darius where I was going. On the deck outside, I found Kezia and her boyfriend sitting near the stern bar watching the water. I dropped into a chair beside them and tried to look normal. A few minutes later, I looked across the outdoor deck, and there he was. The same man from inside, now seated at a table on the far side of the deck bar area. He was looking at me. My heart was hammering. I looked away and did not look back. I stayed with Kezia until she and her boyfriend decided to turn in, and then I walked back to the cabin, fast, not quite running, checking behind me every few steps through the long, carpeted stateroom corridor. I made it to the cabin, locked the door, and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a while before Darius came in, and I pretended to be asleep. I didn't see the man the next day. The ship was big. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I'd misread the situation, that he hadn't been watching me specifically, that I'd been paranoid in a dark and crowded room. I nearly convinced myself of that. Then, late that night, Darius and I went to one of the ship's late-night restaurants with Kezia and her boyfriend. Around 1 a.m, full and tired, I told them I was heading back to crash. Darius said they'd be another hour at least. I said goodnight and headed down through the ship toward our corridor. When I turned the corner into our stateroom hallway, I stopped. The door to our cabin was slightly open. A sliver of light was visible at the edge. I stood there in the corridor, completely still, running through every possibility. Darius hadn't come back. I'd just left him at the restaurant. Room service didn't come at 1 a.m. We had both left the door firmly closed. I remembered checking it myself. I pushed the door open slowly with 2 fingers, staying back from the frame. The cabin looked empty. I checked the bathroom. Nothing. All our stuff was in its place. Nothing was moved or missing. I concluded that maybe the door latch had failed or Darius had come back and left again. And I turned off the overhead light, climbed into my bunk, and pulled the covers up. I have no idea how long I'd been asleep when I felt it. A hand touching my face, fingers moving slowly across my cheek in the dark. I shoved it away and said something half asleep, something like, "Stop it, Darius." And then I opened my eyes enough to see that Darius was not in his bunk. His bunk was empty, and there was a figure standing beside my bed in the dark. I screamed. I don't have another word for it. It was the loudest sound I have ever made, a pure, uncontrolled noise that came from somewhere below thought. The figure lurched backward. Darius burst in through the cabin door. He'd been in the corridor apparently, just getting back, and turned on the lamp. The man from the club was standing against the wall of our cabin. The same man. The same blank, watching expression. Darius was 21 years old, and he hit that man 4 times before I had fully sat up in my bunk. I got up, and I helped. I don't regret it. Within a minute, there was pounding on the door. Our neighbor cabins had heard the screaming and the impact. And then my parents were in the doorway, and my dad had the man down on the floor with a knee on his back, while Darius called the ship's customer service line, and within 3 minutes, 2 security officers in uniform were removing the man from our cabin. He was held in the ship's detention area for the remainder of the cruise. I don't know what happened to him after we docked. There were questions about how he'd gotten into the cabin, about whether he'd been in there before I arrived, about what he'd intended. None of those questions were answered to my satisfaction while I was on the ship. Now, I'm 26 now. I have not been on a cruise since. I probably won't. Some of my friends go every year. Big group trips, party cruises, Caribbean itineraries. They send photos. I look at the photos and I think, the ship is enormous. It has 4 restaurants and 2 pools and a movie screen on the deck. And corridors. Long carpeted corridors. And doors that might, in the dark of a late night at sea, be open just a crack when you know you closed them. I tell my friends I prefer to fly. These 5 accounts were shared by real Americans. Some details have been adjusted to protect the identities of those involved. The events themselves have not been altered. If any of these stories feel close to home, if something about a recent trip or encounter has left you unsettled and you don't quite know why, trust that feeling. The instinct that something is wrong has saved more lives than any self-defense class ever taught. Stay alert, stay together, and always check under the mattress.